Welcome to this week's episode of Bird Brain. Today, I am joined by special guest Tom. How are you, Tom?
Yeah, I'm okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm pretty good. I've just come in from outdoors, looking after an Egyptian vulture. So that's always fun, isn't it?
Wow, I think unfortunately for my six previous guests, you have just nailed the best intro of any of
What's that? 10 seconds. We're in a
them.
record here.
I like it. A real casual brag about how cool your job is.
Well,
So,
you know.
can you please tell my listeners what it is you do for a job? But within that, sort of, why is it that you do what you do as a job?
Yeah, of course. So I am the deputy head of living collection, which is a long-winded way of saying I support in looking after the animals that are here at the Hawk Conservancy Trust and sort of looking after the staff that look after the animals as well. So the Hawk Conservancy Trust, for anybody who doesn't know, is a visitor attraction based near Andover in Hampshire. And we're also a conservation charity. So we have a visitor centre. People can come and watch the birds fly. You can come and sort of interact with the birds as well on some of our experiences. But we also have a conservation mission, which is simply the conservation of birds of prey, which makes it sound really easy when it's in a nutshell like that, but birds of prey, like lots of animals, as we know, are experiencing a whole range of different threats out in the wild, and it's our job to try and put a stop to some of those threats and find ways we can mitigate the issues that they're facing. And for me, wildlife has always been a massive part of my life. I used to go out on walks with my grandparents. Some of the earliest memories I have is going to see, wild buzzards and kestrels out in the countryside with my grandparents on long walks. So it's sort of in the bedrock of who I am really, what makes me me. And so, yeah, coming to work at the Hawk Conservancy Trust, I first visited here when I was about 15 years old. I already worked with birds of prey then at another centre in Northamptonshire, where I'm from. And I knew the day that I walked through the door that this is where I wanted to work. Everybody here is, super passionate about their job, and we all do it because we love the birds. And obviously, having the addition of doing some fantastic work saving birds of prey around the world it's like you say, it's super cool what we do, and there's no point beating about the bush. We have an amazing job, and yeah, I wouldn't want it any other way really. This is home.
I love that. I think that hardly anybody gets to say that a job is also a home, like a safe place where your identity feels whole and is aligned with how you feel you fit in the world and your goals for your life in it. The preservation of the environment is something that I think nearly everybody cares about on some level, but
Sure.
it's so hard for people, I think, to find a way that they feel like they can access a way to support that they can see outcomes in. And I know that we shouldn't need to see outcomes, but it is nice when you do. It is really lovely. And with that in mind, obviously you've always been working in this sort of arena, and there are obviously different trends and different research. Is there anything that there's a particular focus on at the moment that you would like to shout about from the rooftops, like in terms of the work that you're doing?
Yeah, definitely. So I mentioned when we first started talking here today about the Egyptian vulture, and most of the work that we do overseas with birds of prey is with vultures because they are the most threatened group of birds on Earth. So when we talk about, whether something's endangered or critically endangered, most species of vultures across the world have what we call a less favourable conservation status. So they're vulnerable, endangered, or critically endangered, one step away from being extinct in the wild. And a species that falls under the category of endangered is the lappet-faced vulture, which is one of Africa's largest and most powerful vultures. And we've pretty much just over the last 12 months started a brand new project with them out in Africa, which is to try and work out why elephants decide to push over the trees that they nest in. So this is an endangered bird of prey that is
Wow.
absolutely enormous. They're like, they weigh a great deal. These are birds that have like a 2.5 meter wingspan. They're weighing in like 6, 7 kilos, and yet they roost and nest in some pretty short trees, like 2 to 5 meters tall. And for whatever reason, we have absolutely no idea, but elephants like to come along and push over the trees that they roost and nest in. So we're figuring out at the moment why that might be, and more importantly, and more pressingly, how we can figure out a way to deter them from doing that. Now, of course, we love elephants, don't get me
Yes,
wrong. We're
of
incredible animals. Everybody loves an elephant, but we don't love them quite so much when they're doing that. So we're trying to figure out ways that we can safely move them away from lappet-faced vulture nesting trees.
I actually love that you've brought that anecdote forth at this point because I'm going to announce the characters and the sort of pop culture reference for this episode at this point so that I can really dig into what you've just said. So for our listeners, we are obviously going to focus on vultures. And in
Yeah.
this case, we are going to focus on the vultures from the Jungle Book. But having watched it this morning, the 1967 version, having watched it this morning to swat up alongside all my other research, I was thinking about the elephant characters. And obviously, they trot out that line about an elephant never forgets. And they use it humorously because
Hmm.
continues to forget things throughout. But I was wondering if there's some kind of weird grudge that they might hold against these vultures. Maybe they have a grudge against them.
Yeah.
Or is it the idea that are you seeing any evidence that they're just is it because of the height of trees? Like would they do it indiscriminately to that type of tree, or do they seem to be targeting the trees because the vultures are in them?
It seems to be the ones that the vulture nests are in. So the two, or the main theory really at the moment is it might be something to do with the smell. So obviously elephants rather have a pretty sensitive sense of smell, so maybe that's something to do with it. But your idea of it being something to do with a grudge, I think might hold some water actually, because I was thinking about how elephants are quite emotive creatures. They're an emotional bunch, and maybe at some point they've seen their family members post-death being fed upon by lappet-faced vultures. But it does just seem to be lappet-faced vultures that they target rather than some of the other species that might be more abundant in the area doing the same thing. So really, Kelly, I'd love to be able to tell you why. I really would, because then we might be closer to an answer as to how to stop it. But really, we've no idea. This is brand new research
Hmm.
that a member of our team, Dr. Campbell Myrne, who's our head of conservation research and education here at the Trust, he was working on another project with another species of vulture in Africa, sort of towards the beginning of last year, and saw this happening. And it's sort of
Wow.
from there, it's begun a whole new project to try and work with the species.
And I suppose there's things that, for people like me that don't work in conservation, there's things that sound sort of easy. Like, can you ring fence that area? But once you start doing that, you're interfering with loads of other things, aren't you? Like I assume that elephants and many other creatures actually need to access shade in certain areas, and you can't just suddenly ring fence the shade. You're really interfering. But then that brings that age-old question, doesn't it, of at what level is it acceptable
Yeah,
to,
how far do we go?
yeah.
Yeah, and well, to answer your question, like we are, like all options are kind of on the table and are being sort of thought about and discussed. The ring fencing idea is one, it has to be a ring fence that is strong enough to withstand an elephant. So, if you've
Yeah,
seen an elephant within a zoo somewhere, there needs to be pretty hefty equipment involved to make sure that that's strong enough, and to get that out into the middle of nowhere in the bush in Africa, in the on the grass veld, that is going to be quite hard. It's going to be quite difficult and expensive as well. So, but
yeah,
it could be an option. The other thing we've got to be careful of is if we put a fence around the tree, does that tree then become undesirable to roost in for the vulture? And we've sort of made it happen. The thing that we're trying to prevent, we've made it happen by deterring them from having youngsters in that tree. So whatever we do has got to be palatable to the
yeah.
vultures, but unpalatable to the elephants. And that is another arm to the problem that we're trying to solve.
It's so interesting though, and I think there's something so exciting about working on projects where you really get to test your mind as well. You get to try multiple theories or and take them to their sort of natural conclusion, even if it's just in theory in a boardroom. Like I love the idea of trying to work that out on a larger scale. That's so exciting. Thank you for sharing that. So to sort of take us into the world of the Jungle Book. I'd like to ask you a question about the vultures in the Jungle Book. I thought that it was actually quite heartening that we quite like the vultures in the Jungle Book.
Yeah.
And I wondered if you, having worked with birds of prey and focused on vultures for so long, have you got other sort of examples of vultures being popularized in a positive light, or is the Jungle Book kind of on its own with that?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think you're absolutely right that the vultures sort of come good in a way, don't they? In the Jungle Book, we know instinctively that they're carrion eaters, and from what I remember, it's been a little while since I've watched the Jungle Book, and it was one of my favourite childhood films. But they're sort of portrayed in this sort of desolate landscape, not a
Yes.
lot growing, sort of everything's dead. Which vultures
Yeah.
are always characterised with this sort of environment around them, whereas in reality, an environment with vultures in it, is usually healthy and thriving and good. So that's
Mhm.
sort of one thing that's not quite right. I cannot think off the top of my head of any other scenario where the vultures have been the goodies. I think one of the other Disney films that uses them is Robin Hood as well, and I think
Yeah.
they're sort of baddies in that, aren't they?
Yeah.
So yeah, usually they are characterized as being baddies, or at the very least not very smart, not very graceful, and certainly far from beautiful as well. Which I think on all of those points we can back up an argument against.
Oh, come on. Tell me what the prettiest vulture is then.
Oh, I reckon the pretty or most striking vulture for me has got to be a bearded vulture. They're absolutely stunning. Sometimes called the lammergeier was their sort of pseudonym, but the bearded vulture has this gorgeous black and white plumage, and then they go off into the mountains. They dust bath in iron-rich soils, and they turn a scarlet red colour. And nobody's 100% sure why they do this, but it might be to get rid of bacteria in their feathers, or it might be a sign of prowess within their environment. That if they can find these iron-rich soils, they've got time to do that, and therefore they're not struggling for food. So therefore, it might be sort of a status thing. We don't know, but yeah, it makes them, I think, the most striking vulture in the world. Yeah.
Oh, that's really nice. I don't think I've heard of that they become scarlet. What a lovely idea.
Yeah, yeah. So the real feathers, like I say, are like a whitish, creamy sort of a colour, and yeah, then they get this sort of red colour. And they're not the only ones to do it. There's other species that will do the same thing, but bearded vultures most famously, I think.
Oh, that's really lovely. In the Jungle Book, they are sort of meant to be loosely inspired by the Beatles,
Yeah.
which I I found really fascinating because I hadn't understood that as a child, and
No,
yet
I
I've
didn't.
grown up with the Beatles in my household. Like my dad's a massive Beatles fan. I love the songs. But I think maybe because of that sort of disconnect in age, like obviously I was growing up in the 80s, the Jungle Book had already been out for a long time.
Yeah.
When you're first watching it, I know the Beatles songs, but I suppose I probably hadn't known what they actually looked like until I was older.
Mm.
So I thought it was really interesting that they did that. And it meant that they've got, the very much mop top hair and they've got the Liverpudlian accent. It turns out that Disney had approached the Beatles asking them to voice them, and they sort of gently declined. And this has kind of gone down, it's become that kind of urban myth territory of, was it just because John Lennon didn't want to, could he not get on board, or what were the reasons? No one really knows, but it didn't end up being the case. And I did think it was really interesting that in 2016, when they did the live action release, the director wanted to approach McCartney and Ringo Starr to get them to voice them, but again, it just didn't work out. So it's not to be. It
No, I
is
think
not.
they missed a trick there, didn't they? Who wouldn't want to
Yeah, I
voice a
know.
cartoon vulture?
Yeah, and I think interestingly as well, in the live action remake, the vultures don't have a speaking part. So
Hmm.
maybe the director just thought, if we're not getting the Beatles, we're not doing it. But I thought that that was quite telling because the vultures actually, sing sort of two songs. They do the "What Do You Want to Do" song and have a bit of a routine with that. And the memorable one is that that's what friends are for.
Hmm.
And for them to go to have no speaking part at all and just kind of the sort of extras in a scene, I thought was quite telling that for all the representations of creatures in the Jungle Book, they decided to take vultures out. And I wondered if that's because it speaks to the bad reputation that they have, the idea that they're sort of bad omens in some ways. So, with that in mind, are there any things about vultures that you would like to dispel? Any myths that you think people need to sort of
Oh,
get to the back of their minds? And any sort of endearing things you could tell us about vultures?
definitely. Yeah, because that's what we sort of pride ourselves on doing. When people walk through the doors here at the Trust, we want to send everybody away with a better view of vultures. And I have to say, the misconceptions that come up most of all is number one, that they're ugly. And for the most part, people who say they're ugly have never actually seen one
Yeah.
in the flesh face to face. And when you have a close up look at a vulture, they're actually not as ugly as you first think. And I'm under no illusions, Kelly. They're not going to win any conventional beauty pageants. You pitch any species of vulture against a barn owl to the public vote, the barn owl's going to win hands down every time. Let's face it.
I mean, they are
But
quite majestic,
they're
aren't
very majestic. They're gorgeous. I love a barn owl as much as the next man. But vultures deserve a little spot in the limelight for their, I think, sublime beauty in their own way. They're just beautiful in a different way to a barn owl or a golden eagle or whatever else.
Yeah.
Also, I think people don't necessarily see beauty in the same way I might see beauty, or somebody who's working with a select group of animals might view beauty. And I think beauty is how, in nature, is how well does it do its job by the adaptations that it has. So one of the biggest reasons people say don't like vultures, they're ugly because they have a bald head or they don't have very many feathers on the top of their head. That's why people think they're ugly. Now, to me, that's part of the story that makes them really beautiful. Because if you think about, let's say, an African whiteback vulture, for example, the best day of their week in the wild is when their head is at the wrong end of a rotten zebra. It's not a pretty job, pretty horrible job. Do you want I think the barn owl having these beautiful pure white feathers? It's obviously not going to go down very well if you're a vulture doing that.
No.
So actually, they've got very few feathers on the top of their head to help keep them clean. So that makes them beautiful to me. Which brings me on to the next thing people will say is I don't like vultures because they're dirty. They hang around, smelly, rotting
Mhm.
animals. They're dirty. When in actual fact, the opposite is true. Now, number one, they have few feathers on the top of their head, so that helps to keep them clean. But vultures are super clean creatures. When we watch them in the aviaries here, or you see footage of them in the wild, or if you're lucky enough to go and see them in the wild, one of the things you'll notice is they're constantly preening their feathers. They're making sure that every imperfection is weeded out to try and make themselves as clean as possible. And it makes sense because if you're hanging around potentially death, disease, and destruction on a daily basis, and you don't keep yourself clean, you're going to end up picking up on some of that disease yourself. So vultures are probably among the cleanest birds that we work with here because they have to be. So don't get fooled by people who say that they're dirty and they spread disease, etc., because it is not true.
Ah, that's really interesting. I was actually going to ask, there's obviously the association with them picking over a dead carcass. People just don't like that idea. And I think, the same as you get this with sort of ravens, crows, a lot of corvids as well. I think people have a lot of associations with death and misery, etc. But why don't vultures get sick eating what they do? Like, is there sort of a time span on the carcasses they will eat, or are they exceptionally hardy compared to other birds?
Sort of both, really. So I think we naturally assume that vultures are eating lots of rotten food, where
Mhm.
usually they're so efficient at finding the carcasses, by the time they're actually feeding on them, they're fairly fresh, to be honest, and they would prefer to eat fresh food. It's easier to digest and carries less risk, of course. But most vultures, it's been found, they do have exceptionally strong stomach acids that enable them to break down that potentially rotten meat where other creatures might not be able to do it. And they've also got sort of enzymes and other bacteria within their system that help to break down the carcass. So, yeah, they've got exceptionally strong stomachs and their preference is always fresh is best.
Ah, okay. Okay. That makes sense. So in the movie, the vultures, as I've mentioned, do quite a lot of singing.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you something here. Do vultures in the wild have any kind of sort of social calls or vocalizations that they use to communicate with each other that are particularly interesting?
Yeah, well, they don't come out with Octopus's Garden here, there, and everywhere. That's for sure. But they do have some interesting vocalizations. Some of them, some species are almost silent. You hardly ever hear them make a sound at all.
Mhm.
They don't really have a song like lots of birds will, and they don't really. They generally don't call out either to each other. A lot of the noises that we hear vultures making surrounds feeding, so some of that social activity on a carcass, barging each other out of the way. We see a lot of this sort of frenzied feeding activity
Okay.
for a lot of what we'd call the sort of classic vultures, the gyps vultures with a long, slender neck and a big bill. They tend to make a lot of this sort of hissing and grunting around a carcass. Some of them have like a little squeak that they'll make to each other, and especially young vultures communicating to their parents in and around the nest site. We hear some of that squeaking noises, and we hear that again during breeding season around copulation as well. So it's a way that they'll sort of pair bond with each other. But unlike, I don't know, maybe something like a bald eagle or an African fish eagle is a great example of a bird of prey that has an amazing call where you can hear them for, you know, maybe a couple of miles around. Vultures are not vocal in the same way generally.
Ah, okay, thank you. So in their song, That's What Friends Are For, I think I really like it that they included that in the film because it encapsulates the theme of friendship that's throughout the whole story. So Richard Sherman, who came up with it with his brother actually, he said of the song, and I quote, that we wanted the vultures to represent loyalty and camaraderie, even if they did seem a little bit odd. The song was our way of showing that true friends are there for you, even when you least expect it. And I guess that's a nod to the fact that the vultures do swoop in to help Mowgli when Shere Khan is attacking. And their instinctive response was to retreat and sort of leave him to it, but they follow that loyalty and they come and fly in and then there's this group effort to save Mowgli. But in terms of the idea of vultures working together, do they work together or are they quite competitive with each other?
Well, vultures are gregarious on the whole, so they like to live with other vultures mostly. So here at the Trust, most of our vultures either live with another individual or within groups. And you'll generally find vultures feeding in groups. And I think that's partly down to wherever the opportunity is, they all flood to the same area. So rather than them actively working collaboratively as a team, they're all in the same place, all to get the same bonus of feeding. So I haven't seen any evidence of vultures, working like a pack of dogs, for example, hunting
Yeah.
dogs. But they do seem to be around each other. They're also generally monogamous as well, so they'll just find one partner that they're loyal to, and they come back to the same partner year in, year out. So that certainly says something about their relationships. But yeah, you do see these birds in big numbers. 200-300 birds might come and feed on a buffalo carcass, for example, or dead cattle across India. We're talking about the Jungle Book, of course, which is set across India. Historically, cattle was fed upon when it died out in the field, when it sort of came to the end of its days, was fed upon by vultures, which is a great way of sort of disposing of the carcasses there. And yeah, they'd be in huge numbers. Like I say, not necessarily to work together as sort of friends, but maybe there's a little bit of safety in numbers, though. If there's 400 vultures all in the same area and you're a predator, you're going to probably think twice about trying to attack one of those birds on its own.
Oh, that's a really good point. Are they quite aggressive?
Um, yeah, they can. Well, actually, they can be quite cowardly, to be honest.
Can they?
Yeah, when you see them around a carcass, and I say that in the nicest possible way, they're sort of always waiting for one of their mates to make the first move. They can be quite suspicious. So you'll see a lot of vultures all gathering around, watching this carcass, making sure that it's safe first, and then somebody will start the feeding frenzy, and then everybody joins in. So yeah, they're not always the bravest.
That's really interesting. It seems to speak to research, though, on social responsibility as well, because the more people are involved in social responsibility, the less someone wants to take ownership of it. So maybe
Yeah,
they are just all waiting, and then everybody's acting. Really, really interesting.
yeah.
Okay, great. I like that. Um, I am interested in a couple of other things. So if you could give a pop culture makeover to a real vulture species, what would it be? Would you be going for a vulture that you already think has like a rock star attitude or a superhero persona, or would you be trying to find some obscure vulture that you wanted to get at the forefront of pop culture?
Yeah, well, there's only 23 species across the whole world,
Hmm.
split into two groups in the old world and the new world. So Europe, Africa, and Asia, and then the Americas. So there's not a huge number to choose from. I think the one that would translate best, and I think could mean really good things for what is an endangered species, is the Egyptian vulture. They have the most fantastic hairdo. They've got this sort of spiky white feathering on the top of their head. They've got a bright orangey yellow face. And in terms of their superpower, they're the only truly migratory species of vulture. And so you find them in Europe, Africa, and Asia, and they'll traverse huge distances. So to me, that's a superpower to be able to migrate, maybe 4,000 kilometers a year. I think that's pretty good going. And they're, yeah, when you said rock star, I sort of think they kind of already look a bit like a rock star.
Okay, I like that. That you would cast them. What kind of role would they have?
Oh, crikey, I don't know.
Would they be a lead character or would they be someone's sidekick?
I think they'd have to be lead because of that pure white plumage. They just
Yeah.
stand out so well.
Yeah.
Sort of got the Captain America vibes going on, maybe.
Okay, I like it. We need to get an Egyptian eagle into the Marvel universe.
Yeah, it's the winged Avengers. Has that been taken already?
I don't think so. I like it. I think we should pitch it. The Winged Avengers, sorry. And okay, come on. Winged Avengers that are just birds of prey. So you've got your Egyptian eagle. Who else would you have? If you could only have five
Oh,
birds of
wow.
prey that are going to make up the Avengers.
Okay, I think we're going to go the classic, the peregrine falcon has got to be in
Okay.
there. Fastest animal on Earth, so high speed.
Okay.
Let's go to, oh, crikey, this is really hard. Maybe a great grey owl because they've got the most silent flights. They're so fluffy when they beat their wings, they're just absolutely silent. So they sneak up on their prey. Then I reckon we can
Speed and
go
stealth.
to, yeah,
Okay. Speed, stealth, and we've also got beauty from our vulture, right?
of course, yeah, just that
Okay.
striking beauty. I'm going to go to the caracaras for
Ooh.
intelligence. They are probably the smartest birds of prey we know. They're very corvid-like, so they can be kind of like your man in the van. I think they could come up with the schemes
I
and
love it.
how we're going to catch this baddie.
Yeah.
And then you've got to be the secretary bird, right? The killer kick. They wander through
Okay.
the savannah. They kick with 4.5 times their own body weight in force. They've got that
Wow.
power and strength behind them.
Uh, you did that exceptionally quickly.
I think it's ready to pitch to Marvel, like you said. I think that would
I
make a
love
great
that.
show.
I feel like we should start working on a children's book immediately.
Definitely, definitely. And all of those are species that are in some way, they need help in the wild. So, the more eyes on animals like that, the better, really.
There's something really fascinating, isn't there? And it's humbling and unfortunately saddening that you've just listed birds as well with that are so well adapted, right? A bird that can fly silently, a bird that can kick with such force, the stealth aspect, the speed, all these things, and yet they're still endangered, even though
Mm,
they've evolved to be able to be at the peak of power within, across species, they still can't sort of outrun the destruction.
yeah,
When
it's quite
would,
scary.
yeah, and obviously, I've the reason I do bird brain is because I want to be able to talk about things with pop culture references, and I want to invite as many people to sort of be part of the conversation. And remember, you don't need to work in conservation or know loads about nature to care about it, but is it hard to constantly be coming up against stats like you are? Is it hard not to sort of lose faith, or do you think that these sort of things do tend to be cyclical, that things get bad before they get better?
Uh, Yes, well, to answer your first question, yeah, it is hard when
Mm,
we get figures that are coming through that kind of shows that things are not, at least not quickly, getting any better. But if anything, I mean, at least at the stage I'm at now, it sort of spurs you on to do better for the natural world that's around you. I think it can be very, very easy to kind of get depressed, like literally depressed about the state of the natural world around us. And we talk a lot between us here about, having eco anxiety and trying to do our best by the natural world. So it is really hard, but it's at the end of the day, it's our mission here to look after birds of prey, and we know that birds of prey don't live alone, and there's a whole ecosystem that's around them that needs supporting. But at the end of the day, our focus is on birds of prey, and we know that we've got the tools and the expertise to do the best by them that we possibly can, and that to me keeps me going, I think, and just inspiring people about them. So a big part of my job is talking to visitors who come to see us about these incredible birds who've never heard of a secretary bird, who
yeah.
have never going to get the opportunity to encounter an Egyptian vulture in the wild. But I can put those birds and invite those birds to come super close to people,
Yeah.
and that sparks something that lasts a lifetime for lots of people who come to see us. I know it did for me. Seeing those birds, it made a big difference. So it's the sort of next generation. My little boy is going to grow up in a world where he and his cohort are going to need to really tackle the really hard stuff. So I'm hoping to inspire him and anybody else who comes up, and that keeps me going, I suppose.
Definitely. And I think that it's very clear that for anybody that loved nature when they were young, whether it's because they were immersed in it, whether it's because, they work, their families had sort of histories of working, in agriculture even. And although that's obviously a very contentious issue, families that have grown up in agriculture, there's still an awareness of the landscapes and the creatures within it,
Sure.
rightly or wrongly, what the outcomes of that. But I think whatever your entry is into it, and for me it was more things like books and things like I was obsessed with the faraway tree. And
Oh
this is
yeah,
like
okay.
ridiculous, but just the enchanted forest, hearing about the trees and hearing about the creatures that lived in these places. And then the animals of Farthing Wood was massive when I was young,
Yeah,
and mum and I used to cry nearly every week about the struggles these animals had. And essentially it's because of the destruction of green corridors. That's what the whole of that series is about.
and the same for the wind in the willows. Poor mole
100%, one of
losing
my
his house. Oh.
favorites. Yes. And seriously, when I did my MA in travel and nature writing, I said that in my application. I said the winds in the willows, the faraway tree, and then when I got a bit older, I was obsessed with his dark materials.
Mm,
They they are not preaching doom and gloom to you the whole time, but they gave you a tenderness, a fondness, and a desire to do better because you fell in love with these characters. So,
definitely.
and I think it's really powerful when somebody's, like a city person like me, you don't always have those direct links to nature. But when you've grown up immersed in it in your mind, you do as well. And I think you're right. If you can give somebody an experience or make them feel part of something that facilitates their love and determination to do something, it's a really powerful thing. And
Yeah.
it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, and it can really does last a lifetime for lots of people. I mean, some people clearly lose that a little bit. There's somewhere along the way that connection gets lost. And it's a great pleasure of mine to reignite that for some people, who say, yeah, I always used to love watching birds when I was little, or and just because of school and university and work and whatever else, it sort of gets wheedled out of us a little bit, doesn't it, if we're not careful, if you don't continue to pursue it. But you're absolutely right. And I think, again, here at the Trust, a big part of my job is how do we tell the story of these birds? And one of the key things in doing that successfully is to create a link between the audience watching and the birds in front of them, that it's not just, oh, here's another bird, but
Yeah.
this is this character. So it's Angola, the secretary bird, it's Bo, the Egyptian
Yeah.
vulture. These are individuals that represent an entire species. And if you fall in love with an Egyptian vulture called Bo, you fall
Yeah.
in love with an entire species. And yeah, totally get where you're coming from with that.
And I feel the same. I volunteered at the donkey sanctuary a few years ago, and I loved the donkeys and I loved the experience. And but I fell in love with Bramble. Bramble was the naughtiest donkey, so naughty, and it just filled me with this absolute joy. And that transferred to all donkeys. And obviously, I went to volunteer there because I already cared, fine. But it became so much more important to me because you could ground that kind of abstract notion of, oh, I love donkeys, they're great, to the actual, when you worked alongside them and you found out about how they pine for, if they lose their sort of mate, if you like, but they didn't necessarily have to be a romantic mate. They kind of pair.
Okay.
If when they lose that bond, often donkeys do die of a broken heart. They literally just can't. They find it really hard to navigate the world without the creature that they've bonded with, and it's fascinating to find out that they can bond across species as well, which
Okay.
is great when people sort of ill-advisedly keep donkeys alone. They might bond with a sheep or a dog, or you've had it with ducks as well, like
Okay.
amazing geese. But again, they have different lifespans. You tend to need to try and bond them with something else as well, like if that one passes away. But I just think that it was amazing how it caught me off guard that actually, yes, getting to know individual donkeys, I didn't expect it to deepen that wider feeling of wanting to be more of a custodian for nature, right? And sort of do more that you can and talk about them more. And it is amazing.
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest ways that people help and support us here is by adopting our birds. And I'm sure
Yes,
you had the same sort of thing with the donkeys as well. But
definitely.
people want to adopt Charlie the barn owl and Angola the secretary bird because those are the birds they know and love. And for
Yeah.
lots of people, again, not going to have the opportunity to work alongside those animals directly. But it's been that individual that sparked the love and then the adoption that's help them to continue to help what they love. So yeah, it's really important, definitely.
Yeah. And coming back to the Jungle Book a bit, I was considering a couple of other things in there. So the vultures come across as quite sort of clumsy.
Hmm.
They're often sort of bouncing on the trees in a bit of a strange way. When they fly, they're kind of somewhat bumping into each other, and they seem to sort of pause at the wrong place and then crash into each other a bit. Now, this is probably just to be endearing, but are they elegant birds or can they be a bit clumsy?
I think they can be a bit clumsy, to be honest. When they're down on the ground, there's a lot of squabbling, a lot of fighting, a lot of bouncing around, like you said. But the thing we often don't get shown in popular culture, and even on things like nature documentaries, which are supposed to champion all sorts of nature, you
Yeah.
tend to only see them on the ground, usually knee deep in blood and guts and horrible stuff. The best way to see a vulture is up and on the wing when they become the most graceful animals you can think of, really. They're just beautiful, beautiful flyers. By and large, they all they need to do is hold their wings out, they thermal around, catching any updraft they can. So they fly fantastically. But yeah, they do sort of lumber around a little bit on the ground, especially the larger species, just because they're so massive. Their wings are so big. They've got this big long neck, this huge beak. So they're not really adapted to be graceful on the ground, but they do turn out to be when they take to the wing.
Now, why do they need to be such good flyers?
Well, mostly to find food. You know, they're living mostly in big, wide open spaces where food may be few and far between. So they might need to travel, 100 miles in a day to find the next area of feeding opportunity. So often you'll see, again, in popular culture, probably more with the American species, we've all seen the cowboy films with him dying in the desert and the vultures are circling. And the reason vultures circle, like any other bird of prey, is to catch those thermal updrafts that go round, around, around. And so we see this in India and in Africa too. And it's so that they can go up as high as they can. And then all they need to do to travel distance is to tuck their wings, go in the right direction, and just glide. They don't need to actually physically flap their wings to get these, you know, tens of miles, 100 miles in a day. They just need to go up riding the thermals and then track across the sky.
Do vultures often go without food?
Mm. Yeah, yeah. They like to gorge, so they eat as much as they can in a short space of time. Obviously, not knowing when their next meal is going to
Mm.
be. But some of the larger vultures might go a week at a time without feeding. So, yeah, they'll feed at any opportunity they can, but they can survive without food for a little while.
I remember thinking that this is something I really dislike about orcas, that
Okay.
they selectively they will kill a creature and just eat its tongue. And
Oh, yeah.
they hunt other they will hunt certain whale calves and just eat their tongue and leave them. And obviously, a whale is big, so you're like, well, a whale's tongue is also big. But there's something that feels really horrible about that.
Sort of wasteful. Yeah.
Yeah, really wasteful. In terms of vultures, are they likely to stay and completely decimate a carcass, or are they also selective?
No, they eat absolutely everything. And I think this is one of the big positives, and also one of the things that makes them so valuable to the ecosystem that are around them. That when a group of vultures finds something like a buffalo carcass, they will come down and eat every single morsel, and very, very quickly as well. So the reason they're so valuable is because a dead animal is stripped to the bone within minutes of those vultures arriving. So it never really gets the chance to harbour disease and death for other creatures that are around them. So yeah, they're not at all selective. And there's even some species, as I think you were telling me as well, Kelly, that you found out recently that
Yes.
will even eat the bone. There's a species that more than half of their total diet is bone on its own. So not even just bone marrow. They will literally sword swallow huge bones from
I
mountainside.
I just couldn't get my head around that because I just was like, how are there, how does it not hurt?
Mm.
Like, do you know why that is? Like, why is that not really, really painful for them?
Well,
Like,
they're quite a large vulture, so it's actually going back to the bearded vulture I mentioned bathing in the iron-rich soils.
yeah.
Most vultures have a crop, so like lots of birds do, it's a space within their digestive tract where they can start to store and digest food.
Oh,
A bearded vulture doesn't have one, so when they swallow the bones, it goes straight down to their stomach so that it can basically so it can fit. Otherwise it's
yeah,
going to
that's
go through different
yes.
compartments essentially. But yeah, the bearded vulture will start to digest that, and they've got exceptionally strong stomach linings, of course, for any sharp shards of bone.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, they've adapted to do this over millennia to survive almost exclusively on bone.
I mean, it's very resourceful because there's not going to be
Definitely.
much competition for bone. So that's really interesting. I loved it when I watched the opening credits today. I thought it was really fascinating that obviously there's four vultures, but there were only two given official credits, two voice
Oh,
actors.
really?
Yeah, and I was like, that's weird. And then, even weirder, one of them is called Lord Tim Hudson. And I thought, is this a joke? Why is there a Lord playing a vulture? So I had to do my research. And honestly, the more I read about it, the more surreal it became. So, have you ever heard of him?
No, should I have heard of him? This is going to be
No,
really embarrassing
no,
professionally if
I
he's
no, I don't think that you should have. But
some
I was
leading
thinking,
conservationist somewhere that I
no,
should
no, no,
know.
he's not. He's not. He's basically an absolute grifter. His obituary in the Times, right, characterized him as a colorful chancer. Um,
Oh,
they were not wrong, right? The more I read about him, the more amused I became. So, Lord Tim Hudson, right? Not his name. He's actually called George Timothy Bromwell. And in his early career, right, even though he was just working in London, working as a trainee executive for prestige pressure cooker manufacturer, he literally just decided that he had to work in the music business. So this was like in the early 60s, and he was like in his cooking manufacturer job and was like, nah, I want to work in music. And so he just reinvented himself as Lord Tim of Liverpool. Like literally, essentially, a flight of fancy took him, and he decided that his little pipe dream just had to become true. So he rode on the coattails of Beatlemania, and that's why he went with Lord Tim of Liverpool, not
wow.
even from Liverpool, from Cheshire. Was working in London at the time, and obviously because no one can really differentiate accents apparently, and he had all the confidence of a mediocre white man, he managed to carve out this most bizarre niche in the entertainment world. So right, picture this. He's there in London rubbing shoulders with the fashionable Chelsea set, just calling himself Lord Tim of Liverpool. He claimed that he discovered the Moody Blues in Birmingham. Um, Now, this is heavily disputed. He had met them, but he just kept saying that he knew the Beatles and he'd discovered the Moody Blues. And people just seemed to like him. I think he was quite charismatic, right? He became an actual music manager for a couple of bands. And he had such a good gift of the gab that he actually managed to get a career as a DJ temporarily in Canada and even in the States. And the States one killed me, right? Because basically the radio station, KCBQ, is based in San Diego. And they employed him because he told them he was a record producer and he knew the Beatles personally. So he should be employed by them while the Beatles did their North American tour. So they gave him this job, and he just used all his contacts back home to get permission to travel with the Beatles and file reports to be aired exclusively on the radio station. I kid you not.
Wow.
He managed to get it. And then my favorite bit about this is though, he just couldn't do anything correctly. So this is a direct quote from the radio station. He used his suave British accent to promote himself, and he became particularly popular among women. His problems surfaced despite his claims to the contrary, when he could not do the simplest of tasks, such as working the controls, playing records, or punching in ads. Having never before been on the radio, all he could do was sit in the studio and talk on the microphone. And his brief stint at KCBQ in terms of radio work was one of the station's worst staffing disasters. So this blew my mind. And then, even though he couldn't do that, he seems to be literally useless at anything he turned his hand to. He then started this dabbling in voice acting. So he was, messing about pretending he could produce bands, pretending that he, had helped discover the Beatles. Then he actually got to go and meet them and sort of move around with them and then be terribly bad at radio. He then managed to voice the Vultures. He's also in The Aristocrats. So he plays the hip English cat in The Aristocrats.
Oh, yeah.
And then he he's done so many weird things. He opened Hollywood's first organic foods restaurant. But my favorite, after all of this, all these weird things that he was doing, he became really chummy with Ian Botham because he was a massive cricket fan. He just really got all matey with Ian Botham and was his manager for a while and tried to get him to be set up as the next James Bond, which clearly never came to fruition.
No, no.
But I just thought that that was so surreal. Like his life was this weird, wonderful mix of eccentricity and ambition. I just thought, what a perfect fit for a quirky Disney character like Dizzy the Vulture. That's just mad to me.
I mean, there's a lot to be said for confidence, isn't there?
Yeah, I just
It
thought
get you
that was
anywhere.
I just thought it was really hilarious. And I just love it that he's credited as Lord when he's just, that's just a self-given title.
Yeah, I think I might do that myself, actually. That might get open a few doors somewhere.
Now, I know I've kept you for ages, so I just want to know, is there anything exciting that you're working on at the Hawk Conservancy Trust or any great wins you've had that you'd love to give a shout out?
Oh, that's a nice one. Um, yeah, I mean, we've always got something going on in the background. So, um, earlier this year we hatched a young hooded vulture. So again, a critically endangered species here. It's the second time that Vinny and Nugar have hatched a chick out. So that's pretty good news. We've got new aviaries being built for some of our larger vultures and some of our owls as well. So we're always trying to look for ways to, make life a little bit more comfortable for everybody that lives here, all the birds that live here. Um, and yeah, we're sort of going from strength to strength. Really, the place is growing, and we've got a new owl show that's just around the corner for next year, for Easter next year. So we can sort of immerse people even more into the wonderful world of woodland species of birds of prey. So primarily owls, but a few others as well. We've got different special events, fundraising events coming out of our ears. We've got things going on for Halloween and for Christmas, and in January we do a light show. So we're flying owls at night with some sort of subtle lighting to try and take you to different parts of the world using that. So that's always really exciting. So yeah, there's nothing super specific that springs to mind because there's always so much happening here. And I mentioned earlier on about the new project with lappet face vultures. So that's really the thing that we're focusing on in terms of fundraising at the moment because it's so new. Obviously, it needs a bit of funding to get off the ground. So we've been fundraising for that really really hard over the last few months.
Right. Okay. And my final question is just, do you think that the vultures were represented well in the Jungle Book?
I don't think they did too bad. Watching it back, like I say, it's been a little while since I've seen the whole film, but I did watch the little clip of them with Mowgli just before talking to you. I don't think they did too bad. Too bad. They could be a bit more positive, a little bit less. I don't know. They come across a little bit dumb, a little bit stupid, which vultures are definitely not. But yeah, not too bad.
I don't know who should have been more offended, the vultures or the beetles.
Yeah, exactly. I thought that as well. Yeah, would you like to come and voice these characters, which most people think are ugly and stupid? Like maybe
I
that's why they
wondered.
turned it down.
I wondered if maybe there was a bit of vengeance there. Maybe, the songs are all really positive, but maybe they turned them into being a little bit more foolish after they said no.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, maybe they were going to be the tiger and
Yeah.
the bear, and then they said, "No, no, we'll make you the vultures."
Oh, well, Tom, thank you so much for your time today. I really, really appreciate it. And thank you for coming on Bird Brain.
Kelly, thank you so much for having me. It's been lovely to talk to you, and yeah, look forward to seeing where your podcast goes next. I really enjoy it. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.
Elliot explains. What do you call a dead parrot? A polygon.